had sleeves, but I'm gonna stand up and get high energy about this.
Greatest. Good stuff. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We will be recording today's session. So as you feel comfortable, cameras on or off, your prerogative. But my name is Monica Corda. I'm the Director of Member Relations for the Tech Collective. And this morning, we're very pleased to have Todd Knapp, the CEO of Envision, present for us. For those of you who don't know Todd, he the most knowledgeable person I know, and very well respected in the IT community, and I'm sure you will enjoy today's presentation. For those of you who are not familiar with the Tech Collective, we are the IT Industry Association for the state of Rhode Island. We provide info sessions like this on new technologies or topics that you should know about, as well as technical trainings and professional development as well. I have put for you in the chat our website that has all of our upcoming events and trainings, as well as Todd's next session on June 17th. So we look forward to seeing you at these sessions. And then hopefully, few in person and some work with the Venture Cafe, some small events that people can begin to come out and be with each other in community again. So at this point, Todd, I will turn the mic over to you. And
Okay, are you guys all able to hear me? Strangely, I stopped being able to hear Monica briefly there. That was kind of odd. Can you unmute yourself, Monica? I just want to make sure this is all working the way it's supposed to work.
yes.
Ah, stupendous. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so good morning, everybody. I appreciate you guys all jumping in at 10 o'clock in the morning for what is essentially going to be a technology philosophy conversation. So I think you've picked maybe the most heavy-weighted topic you could possibly have at 10 o'clock in the morning. I hope you guys all brought some, coffee or, I don't know, some form of stimulant with you. That's it. There's Kyle, my man, has always got his coffee on him. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to first, I'm going to share up my screen here, and I'm going to let Jeremy handle admitting people into the meeting from the lobby, as long as you're all right with that, Mr. Jeremy. So let me share out my screen. There we are. All right. Now, everybody joined the meeting here muted. I'm about to now click a button and give you guys all the ability to unmute yourselves if you want to. And what I would ask you to do is to stay muted unless you're going to ask me a question. And I like things to be a conversation. So please do not have any hesitation about unmuting along the way and asking anything you want to. If you don't feel like speaking up or being on camera or any of that stuff, that's cool too. You can always post questions in the chat. Jeremy and Monica will both be monitoring it. So if I miss something along the way, then they'll jump right in and holler at me. So I'm going to click that button, and you should all have the ability to unmute yourselves now if you want to. All right. So as mentioned, I am Todd Knapp. I am Envision's founder and CEO. Just a little about who we are. I founded Envision in October of 1998. So, whatever that math is. If only I had an analytics platform and I could do the math. No, just, a scant 23 years ago, kind of actually closer to 22, really, because of when we founded. But, in that time, we've done almost everything that we could do in the space. When I started the business, we were installing dial-up modems so that companies could access the one email address that they typically had, sales at or info at. And now today, we're on a Teams meeting in telepresence talking about how to use artificial intelligence and data analytics to change our businesses. It's come an incredible distance in just the 2 decades that we've been doing this. So the conversation today, if you weren't in the discussion in the last meeting, where we talked about introduction to Power BI, that was all about, for people who really had never seen or used the product. What is Power BI? What is data analytics? We covered that. We covered the 101. Now, this is sort of like when I was, I want to say 16 years old, and I went into, I wanted to go, my father was a big duck hunter when I was a kid. I grew up in Vermont in the woods. My dad was a big duck hunter. I wanted to go with him, and my dad said, well, before we do that, we want you to take a gun safety course. This is your gun safety course. This is the philosophy conversation about how we use analytics and how analytics can be beneficial or really detrimental to a business. And to the culture of your organization, to the way that your people think, work, and live. So we're going to be spending our time on that stuff. Little bit of housekeeping. Again, questions in the comments. If you want to unmute yourselves, originally I was going to have you use the raise hand button and then I'd give you the ability. But honestly, we're all grown-ups. I figure you guys can probably handle the immense, uncontrolled, unbridled power that comes with the unmute button. I'll let you guys do that on your own. If you find the conversation interesting, you are welcome to hit me directly on Microsoft Teams if you want. We are open federated. If you're a Teams user, you can just put in my email address, and assuming that your tenant supports it, you can chat directly to me in Microsoft Teams anytime you want to. I'm always happy to answer questions. We post a lot of content on LinkedIn and YouTube, and particularly our YouTube page, our YouTube feed is growing fast right now. We only started it right at the end of last year. We launched a YouTube channel called Transform Everything. Those of you who know me know that I am very excited about digital transformation. This is one corner of it. I'm always interested in talking about the big picture. So we're here if you want to talk. So let's talk about the incredibly horrible title of this presentation. I did it deliberately. Because this is language that a lot of you will recognize. People frequently are proud of saying, we make data-driven decisions. We have a data-driven culture. I'm not sure that's actually a good thing. I don't think we want to be data-driven. I think what we want to be is we want to be data inclusive, for sure. And I don't think we want our culture to be centered around data. We want a data inclusive posture. And so, what I want from a culture point of view is I want a culture. Well, I forgot to mention to you guys, I have like the worst handwriting in the entire world. So it was either like be an IT guy or be a doctor. So this is it. You're getting like the prescription version of this thing. So I want a culture of innovation. And I don't think that you can have a culture of innovation without having a data inclusive posture. But, I think you guys would all agree that when you talk about data-driven decision making, there are lots of times when, and I've experienced it many times in my own business, when the data said that the right thing to do was X, but culturally speaking, the right thing to do really was Y. And, I've made choices in the past in my business where I looked at it and said, well, the data tells me the smart move, and I mean, let's talk about the pandemic, because I think a lot of people were faced with these kinds of decisions. Is they said, well, the data is telling me that we're in for difficult economic times. We ought to downsize our staff. I went the other way at Envision. I was looking to hire even during the pandemic because I've got a great group of people. And even if the data tells me one thing, the other thing the data tells me is that this can't last forever, right? So I am a big believer in being data inclusive, but I think our culture needs to be focused on innovation. So let's start with a little exercise here. Let's everybody open the chat box for me. And tell me what you think in here before I start whiteboarding anything. What do you think it means to have a data inclusive posture? What does that mean? If you were going to try and create that in your organization, what are some key things you might try and do? Just pop them right into the meeting chat. Let's see if I can get you guys woken up. There we go. Go, Diane, go. I can see you typing. Mary, you chose to be on camera. You better be typing something because I can see you. So, oh, I got all kinds of people typing now. This is great. I saw what you did there. Turning off the camera, little commentary. Data awareness. Analyze data and use as part of your decision making. That's great. I like data awareness. That's cool. Data awareness. And data as part of decision making. Ooh, real time. Those are scary words. A couple more people posting in here. So while they're doing that, let me tell you what I do when I think about data inclusivity and posture. I think about really two things. I think about approach and people. And so if we wanted to, whoa, excuse me. There we go. I'm getting all feisty with my device. Approach, people. All right. So first of all, I want an approach that is modern, that is, and I think the things that you guys are putting here, data awareness and data-driven decision, data inclusive decision making, and real-time dashboards being data informed. I think these are all good things to put on there. This real-time one, this is a really interesting one because real-time means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And when you talk about analysis of data and ingestion of data into a model, processing of that model, then creating dashboards and reports, the real-time element of it is great up until the point that every system that needs to correlate data is capable of supporting it. So it can get really challenging to do that real-time piece. But what I'm looking for is I'm looking for people who are not change averse. They enjoy change. So change is important. Change acceptance is important culturally. I need people that are, this is a big one, non-judgmental. And right now, like 9 people on the call were like, well, we're out. Uh, the reality is that one of the big challenges with data and culture is the rush to judgment aspect of it, where people see analysis of information, immediately draw a conclusion, and then begin to act on that conclusion without having explored the depth and breadth of the context around it. You need an approach that lends itself to access of visibility of the information or transparency, right? So let's talk about 4 things that we can think about and do here. I was talking about modern approach earlier, and I was saying that we need to have a data inclusive culture. So there are 4 things that you can do in your organization around the software tools that you use that will help make data inclusivity easier. And it comes down to what we look for in our applications. Okay, so our process needs to be that we are continually looking to iterate and modernize the technology around us if we want to have a culture of innovation and if we want to have a data inclusive posture. And so if I'm looking for a new piece of software today that I'm going to use in my organization, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to, first of all, make sure that it supports single sign-on and specifically Microsoft Auth. Now, you might be asking yourself, why does this matter? We're talking about data analytics and Power BI. It matters because if we make it difficult to access the source of information because we've got a lot of silos of data and silos of authentication, it also makes it very difficult for our analytics platforms to access them, and it creates more opportunities for failure. Actually, Kyle and I last night were talking about this in kind of a sideways way. We're doing some things at Envision, and I had set up a service account quite a while ago. Literally years ago, and that service account is using conventional authentication. And so, the question was, hey, can we set up some token-based access to this so that we're not subject to having credentials change when they expire and thus break our automated refresh in the data set, so that we don't have to go data set to data set to data set and continually be updating credentials along the way. Again, the analytics are only valuable to the point that they are accessible, and the same is true of the data sources. So I want my applications to support single sign-on and ideally Microsoft authentication. The second thing that I care about is I want something that is automation ready. And again, there's an item at the end of this that is very specific. I stood up today to do this because I needed to get some energy going, and now I keep bumping my device. Something that's automation ready and that has an API. The reason this matters to me is, again, I want, yes, I want real-time analytics, but what I really want is I want action based on data. And so, if I have things that are automation ready, then once we identify what's going on with the data and what the data tells us, we can automate actions based on it so that the world works around us and we're spending more time focusing on human interaction and less time serving our technology, right? The third thing that I'm looking for is I'm looking for integration readiness. And we're going to talk more about why this one's important in a minute. But Envision uses Microsoft Teams, which means that any application that I'm buying into today integrates into Teams or I'm not looking at it. And simply for a very simple reason, my entire staff lives and dies all day long, every day in Microsoft Teams. That's where the center of our work is. I'm not advocating necessarily that Teams is the answer for you specifically. If you want that advocacy, I'll do a different webinar, because I do believe that. But whatever your solution of choice is, we need to make sure that your applications integrate directly into it, so we're putting things in people's line of sight. And then the most important thing here when it comes to the data side of the world is I want open data access. Almost every application that you're going to encounter has some kind of reporting engine in it today. If the way we get access to data for analysis is by opening the application, going into their reporting section, clicking on a pre-built report, which is already ETL'd, by the way, extract, transform, load. They've already manipulated the data to create that report. And then the only thing I can do with it is download it as an Excel or a CSV, and I have no other way to get to the source of data. That application is going to make it very difficult for us to do meaningful long-term analytics against that platform. So if I'm doing these four things when I'm selecting solutions in my organization, and if I'm going through the solutions that I already have, and I'm saying, okay, do the products we have today fit these four things? And the answer is no. So I'm going to start over time, looking for alternatives that do. This is going to position you best for having a data-centric posture, data-inclusive posture. So I argue this point all the time with people, that data is actually pretty dumb. Data are facts. Then there is intelligence, which is different from impact. Data, facts, are raw information. They're exports, they're tables, they're CSVs. They're typically cumbersome for sure. Cumbersome for sure. They are, without question, overwhelming. Everybody has had this issue before, where you've downloaded a CSV out of an application and there are 130 columns of data, and there's what do we say? We just eclipsed 1 million rows in a 200 column CSV file that we're working on for a client right now. That's a lot of information to try and do anything with. Plus, when you open up that information or you get a general report, you're talking about static data. And if you were in the last webinar, and by the way, I should have said this at the beginning, but some progression here. We did the 101 webinar last time. Now we're talking about philosophy. Our next webinar is a technical webinar on how to access data where the source is somewhat obscured or difficult to access. And then from there, we're going to be working with Tech Collective to put together an actual Microsoft training on a 4-day training on Power BI, which is a jumpstart type thing. So we're moving from 101 all the way through technical training with you guys. So you're in step 2. If you were in the last session, you heard me say that reports are the answer to a question that somebody thought you might ask. And my problem with reports is that more often than not, you run a report to get a piece of information. The result of the report leads to more questions. and then you're kind of stuck because there's no way to explore that information. And that is the difference between facts and intelligence. Intelligence takes these things that are raw and cumbersome and overwhelming and organizes them. Oof. This is so why I did not become an administrative assistant. I just have the worst handwriting. It organizes that information. It supports our ability to focus on subsets of data. So, when I have in front of me a set of analytics and I've got sales over time and I've got sales by employee, and I click on an employee on one graph and everything on the page cross filters so that now I can see that employee's sales over time. That is the ability for me to focus on subsets of information. It should, if it's doing its job, reveal trends, things that you might not have seen yourself had you just manually opened up an Excel spreadsheet and started doing math. And it supports the ability to explore. This is what we want out of intelligence. But I would argue that this is where we land most of the time. And as end users, one of the risks that we have is that Power BI and tools like Power BI feel very empowering. We get, an Excel spreadsheet that contained a bunch of information. We import it, we drag and drop and create some visuals, and everybody goes, holy crap, look at this. I can click, I can cross filter, I can explore the data. We're here. We've done it. We have analytics. That's not really true. The last element of this is impact. And so the question is, does the data that you've now analyzed and created reports around and dashboards around, does that create impact? And impact is all about presentation. It's about what we chose to use to represent our data. It is about emotional connection. And I said this in our last webinar too, all decisions are emotionally based. We use data to convince ourselves that it's okay to feel the way we feel about the information. But we make the choice, we make the action because of how we feel about what we see. It is about storytelling. It's about being able to divine the context of what's happening from the presentation of the information, all of this intended to lead to action. So if you took nothing else from the presentation today, the one thing I would want you to take is that the process of going from static reporting to analytics is as much about philosophy and approach as it is about the technology. You have to ask yourself, what is your game? What do you want to use this data for? Is this data that we're going to use to connect people together, to create visibility to context? Is it data we're going to use to support our people? Is it data that we're going to use for storytelling? So in a corporate environment that's a for-profit organization, or even maybe a higher ed, this side of the of the table here is important, because you're using the information to help run the business. In a lot of the nonprofits that I encounter, a big part of what we do is storytelling. We've got donors that are donating to our organization, and we want to be able to show them the value of that investment. And so we use analytics and data to do that. But probably 2/3 of the time that I encounter analytics in the real world, it's being used in a punitive fashion. It's being used to hold people accountable. It's being used to essentially digitally tattle on people that aren't performing to the right level. And so it's very hard to build meaningful culture if the point of data in the organization began from a punitive space. So again, I think as technology professionals, we sometimes get a little tunnel vision about the technology itself. We don't think about the human impact. The reality is that as you go forward with analytics, you're going to find that one set of facts can include many truths. And I think you've all heard people say you can use statistics to prove anything. One of the things that I once got into a big argument about with somebody in my office, a debate. It wasn't an argument; it was fun. We were debating because he had said to me, "Hey, look, the facts are the facts. The truth is the truth." And I'd said to him, "I don't think that's true." So when we look at I don't know why that built that way. When we look at, this is annoying me that this thing's out. There we go. When we look at how we work with data, there are some risks. Bias in your models and poor implementation of your data analytics platform can undermine the value of data analytics. It can destroy your culture, and it can disenfranchise the impact that that can have. And these are some common things that I think are big risks. Underrepresentation. And some of these, by the way, this is not my language. Some of this is industry language. Some of this is me combining a couple of things. Analytics bias, margin bias, and outlier bias are largely the same thing. Depends on who you talk to, which terminology they'll use. But underrepresentation. Underrepresentation is when we have data models that are built that are very rich in one subject matter and very light in another. And so a good example of this would be in my organization. My field team, my field engineering teams, so that's my Microsoft engineers, my network engineers, my web developers and programmers. Kyle from our data analytics. Hi, Kyle. You can wave. Say hello. That's Kyle. Kyle is one of my top Power BI resources in the organization. Every day, Kyle records his time in a time and billing system, right? So I have a tremendous amount of data about what's going on in Kyle's daily life, what's going on in my web team's daily life. Now, my sales organization lives almost exclusively in Salesforce. So because they're not working with tickets specifically, there's not a lot of value in me having them duplicate the effort. I can tell what my sales team is doing by the activity in Salesforce or not doing, right? I mean, if I want that visibility, it's there. But if I look at the volume of data, the amount of data that is represented in my data sets from my field services team outnumbers what I have for my administrative teams or my sales organization, probably 10 to 1. And so the reality is that if I'm going to do analysis of overall employee utilization in my organization, and I wanted to say who's effective and who's not, who's going above and beyond, it would be very easy for me to create a data model that would underrepresent some key and very important people in my organization. And so underrepresentation of data is one common issue. Confirmation bias. I'll give you the exact use case. I had a CEO call me up one time. He said, look, I'm 100% certain that we are undervaluing our services. I want you to build me a dashboard that gathers up all of the time and the overhead investments associated with this line of business, and then the revenue associated with it. And I want you I need you to demonstrate for the rest of the team that I'm right. This is confirmation bias. We went into this starting from a place of we already know what we want the answer to be. We're now trying to manipulate the information to demonstrate what we believe to be true instead of taking our lead from the data itself. So this is a common issue, and I gave you an exaggerated example, but this is a common thing that we see where leadership teams are asking for information because of a gut feeling they have. They're kind of poisoning the well in the process. Analytics bias and margin bias. So this is where we've got incomplete data sets because potentially we have more than one source of truth for a piece of information in the organization, or margin bias where we've got some outliers that greatly skew the metrics and we're not removing those outliers along the way. These are common errors we see all the time. Opportunistic modeling. This is a Todd term. This is not a real thing. This is a Todd term. That doesn't mean it's not a real thing. I believe it's a real thing. I see a lot of organizations that I encounter that I say, okay, what are you doing with Power BI? And they say nothing. And then we go in, we look at the tenant, and we discover that there are literally 30 workspaces that have various pieces of information in them. As we encounter that stuff, what's really going on is the users in the organization are always smarter than IT gives them credit for. You're an IT professional and you're on this call. I promise you, your users are smarter than you think they are. I can't tell you, it's, if I had a nickel for every time I sat in a room and the IT people looked at me and said, well, our users are really not very sophisticated. They don't really understand technology. They don't like technology. We're not going to have that problem. And then I go in and start looking into it and discover that, wow, look at this. Look at all the applications that they brought in on their own. We live in a world of consumerized IT. So yeah, your users are pretty sophisticated, even if they're not sophisticated in the way that you would like them to be. So don't assume that they haven't gone ahead and used an analytics platform of some form to start gathering information and building their own data models. And they may not know to call it that, but that's what's happening. So when you have a lot of different people that are using the same piece of information, and I mean, on the screen right now on camera, because we're IT guys and we do this a lot, Ellis, Chris, Kyle all work for me. All three of these are smart guys. If I said to Ellis, Chris, and Kyle, if I gave each of these three guys the same spreadsheet of time entry for our web development division and said, build me a dashboard to tell me about the productivity of these employees, I would get something very different from Kyle, from Ellis, and from Chris. They would model the data differently. They're using the same set of facts, but they might come to very different conclusions, right? So that's a risk. And then, of course, incomplete modeling, that's where we brought the data in and we never built out the metrics. We never built out the framework around it to have really meaningful, complete visibility across the information. If I'm bringing in cost and I'm bringing in sell and I'm not modeling out margin and margin over time and average costing over time, if I'm not building out that complete model, it's very difficult to get dashboards and visualizations later that are meaningful to the organization. So a thoughtful process around how we model is important. And remembering that bias is a real thing. And if you don't think it's a real thing, I encourage you to go read this book. Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill. I will give you a heads up. There's a big political bent to this book, but the interesting thing, I had the great good fortune of talking with Kathy after seeing her present at the Open Data Sciences Conference in Boston. ODSC in Boston is a local, for some reason, not all that well-known conference. If you get a chance, go. It's awesome. It's a great place to hear how people are using data. And she was speaking to data developers on the subject of bias in models, intrinsic bias. And it was a fascinating conversation, but a couple of choice quotes. Our own values and desires influence our choices from the data we choose to collect to the models we ask. Models are opinions embedded in mathematics. I thought that was really insightful. She really makes a good argument around this. And she talks about things in her books that are examples of how people, without realizing it, unconsciously injected bias into their models and inadvertently had a vast impact. And one example was actually a state level model that was being used for unemployment benefits that it turned out was inadvertently weighting against a particular minority group because of the way that an algorithm had been written in the application. And it was personal bias that had led to it. So we can have some tremendous blind spots. So how do we avoid all this stuff? I've been giving you guys like the doom and gloom, dangerous stuff, analytics. Actually, it's amazing stuff. It's cool. So how do we avoid it? First of all, model consolidation. We want to get down from having a huge number of disparate sets of models that are coming from the same data source to having promoted data sets, trusted data sources. Kyle, do you have a comment on that one, by the way? We're talking about model consolidation and promoted data sets in particular. Can you just briefly tell everyone about promoted data sets in Power BI?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So to preface the conversation a little bit and give a little bit of background to what I'm about to talk about, I'm going to be talking about in the Power BI web service specifically. which is primarily going to be our self-service area and our report viewing area. So when we're talking about promoted data sets and model consolidation, one thing that Power BI specifically allows us to do is create a series of what are called promoted data sets, which are essentially your gold standard. It's going to be data sets that are curated by your data team, your BI team, or whoever the data modeling experts in the organization are, that then allow your users to go in and say, hey, I want to look at this same data set, but get slightly different metrics out of it. I want to change a calculation. I want to be able to actually look at this raw data and draw my own pivot tables off of it. And promoted data sets allow you to actually mark a data set as, hey, here's our gold standard. Go ahead and connect to it. We have verified this data set. We've validated the data set, and we know that what's going to be displayed by the metrics in here are going to be correctly calculated.
Right. And so, that piece of promoted data sets is a Power BI specific feature that I very much like. And it's funny because it wasn't something when I first got involved in Power BI that existed. And I actually, it's one of those weird things that feature got by me at first and I missed it. But I really do love the idea that we can say, look, hey, Mary, Chris, Ellis, here's a model that we've already validated. We know the metrics are right. So you can use this any way you want to create some good information for the organization. Number two is consumer-informed design. Again, we're very guilty of this in our industry. We love building stuff in a vacuum in IT. We're like, what would make our users' lives better? Boy, I bet if we could just make it so that when they hold down the shift key and hit enter twice, the whole screen turns orange, that would make everybody happy. They'd all find that really funny. We didn't ask anybody, and just some day randomly somebody does it and goes, oh, my computer's broken. We're bad at asking users what they actually need and want. If we're going to get in the business of analytics, we need to also get in the business of business. And that's something that we struggle with in IT. We have to be able to speak the language of business. We have to be able to talk to the constituents and really gather real needs from them. What do you need to know? What would make your job easier? And then we need to have the same conversation with other constituents in the business and say, listen, Ellis told me that the most important metric in the company is the number of people wearing blue shirts. Do you agree with that? And Kyle goes, well, what do we care what shirts anybody's wearing? We care about how many hours they build. Oh, all right. So then we go back to Ellis and say, Ellis, why blue shirts? Well, I've noticed that everyone who's wearing a blue shirt bills more hours. Oh, we do care about the same thing. They didn't ask us, they didn't give us the same answer. It didn't even seem related, but it turns out we actually care about the same thing. Consumer-informed design leads to better analytics. Validation and cross-testing directly connected to model consolidation. Fewer and better models leads to better experience for the user population. Designing for self-service. If you've ever spent any time in a database, then what you've realized is that there is a language that developers use all their own. They're becoming their own subspecies of human. They've got their own language, their own culture. They like to hide out in the basement and eat pizza and only emerge when the evening hours come because sunlight is painful. No, I'm kidding. There's probably developers on this call. You guys are great. No, developers, we do things like putting VAR underscore before things, and people look at it and go, well, I don't know what that is, and it's a variable and we didn't declare it. There's all kinds of things that we do in data work that leads the average user to go, I don't know what this means. Designing for self-service means taking in data sets, identifying what these columns are supposed to be, and giving them friendly names so people know what they even are. It means obscuring the ones that are only going to lead to confusion. It means pre-building some metrics and measures that our users can, because they're going to say, what's the margin? They may not know how to calculate margin, but they know what they want to know that answer. So if we have sell price and cost, we should be building out the measure for them that does this, doing cross-filtered measures. Things like that are going to make it easier for people to do self-service. I jumped ahead of myself with measures. And then finally, I can't stress enough the value of user training. We really, really cannot be in the business of just dropping stuff on people's desks and saying, great news, I made your life easier. Let me know how it goes. Bye. There has to be some real training going on in here, and particularly filter training. I have been chuckling to myself for about 3 weeks because Kyle's been working with a client of ours, and we have a chat going between the companies. And every time that this user has a question, they post it in the chat, and probably a solid half of the questions they ask where they begin with an almost accusatory tone, like, hey, the dashboard's giving me incorrect numbers, almost always leads to Kyle writing back, if you look on the right side of the screen at the filter pane and then you clear that filter, you'll have the numbers you want. We've trained this user 100 times on filters, but we're going to need to do something different. We were just talking about that, is maybe we need to move some of the filters off the pane and turn them into slicers on the screen because they're a little easier to understand that way. And this user keeps stumbling over it. So, these are things we can do in any analytics platform, not just Power BI, that will help. Okay. Your analytics cannot be the best kept secret in the business. We have to place our analytics in the line of sight of our user population. This is Todd's argument against intranets. I don't know how many times I've sat in meetings with people that said our intranet doesn't get utilized well enough. How do we improve utilization of our intranet? And I always, in my head, I'm going, get rid of the intranet. The problem with intranets is that everybody's working over here, and then we create this tool and we say, oh, by the way, when you want XYZ, stop what you're doing over here and run off the trail, climb up the hill, over that river and through the mud, and here's this other thing that you can use. It's not healthy to say to users, to get this, go here, to get that, go there, to get this, log in here, use a different password. It's complicated, it's confusing. If Teams is where the center of your work is, that's where your analytics should be. It should be embedded inside of Teams. If you guys are living in SharePoint, that's where your analytics should be. If you have an intranet already and that's what everybody uses, then put your analytics there. Put them in the line of sight of the users. They should have to step over them to get around them. There's some things we can do specifically with Power BI. So Kyle already mentioned it, and Kyle, you're welcome to chirp in here at any point if you think I'm missing anything, bud. But Power BI apps. So when I say that, I don't mean mobile phones. I don't mean I hate that Microsoft does this. They overlap language a lot. An app in Power BI is when we take a data set that we have validated and a model that we've confirmed, and we combine it with some reports and some dashboards, and maybe combine multiple things together, and we package them up into one consumable piece of information for our users that Microsoft refers to as a Power BI app. They are accessible via the web service. They can be embedded in Power BI as a tab. They can be accessed through the Power BI for Teams native app. So all these first three are ways to get those reports directly in the field of vision of the user population. We can deliver them in SharePoint. I mentioned that before. We can integrate them as web components in an intranet, an extranet, or a website. We have the ability with Power BI to embed in custom apps using either Microsoft Power Apps or even custom-built applications. And the custom-built applications are going to leverage the Power BI embedded service. We have also a mobile app for Android and iOS that you can access. So there's 100 ways here that we can do this. And that 100 ways is one of the failings that I see in implementations of Power BI, where especially when you have more than one developer, more than one person that is releasing content, some people release it over here, other people have folks going into the web service, some people have put some things in Teams, and things are in multiple teams. It gets very messy that way. I love having my analytics directly in Teams. When I started out in Power BI almost 3 years ago, and when the product was first getting its feet under it, there was no such thing as the Power BI app for Teams. The native app for Teams did not exist. So what I used to do is I used to embed reports as tabs in channels. And so the way that I had built it at Envision was we have a team called Envision Analytics. All things analytics live in that team. So I'm not dropping it in 50 different places and everyone has to remember oh, what team is that in again? They know exactly where to go, and it's right in their line of sight. It's in their systems. Okay, I promise we're coming to a conclusion here, but this is my argument for you need more than analytics. You need more than just Power BI. Actions speak louder than words. I had a customer. This is actually a real thing going on right now. I have a customer. They are a services organization. They have employee utilization is a big deal for them. Their time entry across their employee base is not reliable. When they have low utilization, they usually don't notice it until at month end when the financials are off and everybody's going, why are the financials off? And the managers aren't really great at responding to issues of utilization. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't wake up in the morning and think it's going to be a great day. I'm going to go and tell one of my employees that they're underperforming. It's going to be fun. That doesn't happen. Most managers are averse to that. They don't really want to. They don't want to make anybody feel bad. Nobody wants to do that, right? Or very few people want to do that. So this was the answer that they came up with. And when I met them, this is where they were. They said, okay, our users are going to input information into their performance information into our data source. So time entry. We're going to harvest that information using the Power BI data gateway. So let's talk about that piece for a minute, okay? Power BI lives, if you were in the last webinar, you might remember that you can download the Power BI software to your desktop. You can import data like, Excel spreadsheets or connect to a local SQL server or any other number of data sources. Some of those sources might be cloud-based. Some of them might live on site. In this particular organization, their time and billing software is locally installed on a server in their data center. So when we publish the report up to the cloud service has to have a way to come back in to get to that data source. The great thing about Power BI is that there are literally hundreds of data connectors. You don't need anything more than just Power BI to be able to aggregate and collect multiple data sources and to integrate them. Your cloud sources, the service will go directly to the cloud. But in the case of things that live on-prem, you install the Power BI data gateway on a server in your environment, and the data gateway will access your local data and pass it to the cloud for modeling. So their plan was, we're going to take our data source, connect it to the data gateway, we'll send it up, create our data model, and develop our reports off of that. Then we're going to tell our managers, hey, every day you guys need to go in and manually review the utilization reports for the employees, confirm that they've been entering their time, do all these different things. And then, by the way, if your employees aren't doing their jobs well, you need to get involved and you need to go and tell your employee that they are terrible and that you're all mad at them and they got to shape up or ship out. And this was where they were when we met them. This is a bad interaction all the way around. One, we just gave all of our managers another job to do. They're already busy. So we just said, look, now you, on top of everything else you do, I want you to go up every day and go check this thing. Number two, we said, by the way, when you check it, probably 9 times out of 10, you're going to have at least one person that you now have to go and have a direct interaction with. That's going to be a negative interaction. From the employee's point of view, they may not know that they're malperforming. It's not that they're lazy. Maybe they just didn't have enough to do that day, and so they didn't have enough utilized hours. It's not their fault. They're not being bad employees, but they're going to have a manager coming to them and saying, hey, you're not doing a good job. What was more concerning about this particular customer is that there was an element of this that was very much Office Spacey, if you've ever seen that movie, where it turned out that there was actually more than one manager that would review the report. And then occasionally you'd get more than one manager that would come to you to talk about why you had underperformed last week. So that's not a very good feeling. And so my question to what I said to them is, look, from a Power BI point of view, you get a B, maybe a B minus, because what you've done is you used Power BI effectively over here. We are using the Power BI data gateway to harvest the data source. The model wasn't terrible. The reporting made sense, but everything after that is kind of a fail in my book, right? So what do we really want? What we want is, nobody woke up at this client and said, I want analytics. What they woke up and said was, I want better utilization. That's what they want. And then if you asked HR and said, what do you want? HR is going to say, I want good employee morale. So let's look at a different way to do it. let's preserve everything that they had already done. We'll leave that as is. So the data, we're going to use the data gateway, get the data model going. We're going to create a report. From our report, we're going to create a dashboard. The reason we're going to create a dashboard is that dashboards give us the ability to generate alerts. We're going to have a dashboard that nobody's ever going to look at. It's only going to be used for alerting purposes. It's got every employee and every employee's prior week utilization. Okay. It's going to generate alerts. From that, we're going to use Microsoft Power Automate. And that's where this piece is. We're going to use Power Automate to pick up the alerts. And then inside of Microsoft Teams, we're going to send a heads up to the manager. Hey, just so you know, you've got an employee that is really doing well. See, the good thing about this is when you send people to go to look at dashboards that are already busy, they tend to do it on an exclusion basis. What I mean by that is they will go exceptions basis, excuse me. They do it on an exceptions basis. They'll go and say, everyone who's doing okay, I'm not going to ignore. Everyone who's got a problem is where I'm going to focus because I only have so many cycles. When you automate things, you can now call out the people that are succeeding or doing way better than the average, in addition to anybody that maybe needs a little assistance. So we use Microsoft Teams. We give our managers a heads up. Hey, here's the people that really outperformed last week. And by the way, here's a user that didn't perform as well, but we've already handled it. Then in Microsoft Teams, we're going to send a notification to the employee just saying, hey, your utilization last week dropped by 14%. If you find yourself needing more to do, you can reach out to your other employees. Here's a couple of projects that are currently in process. We provide the recommendations in the notice in an automated fashion from a self-declared bot. We're not going to send it from a user. We're going to send it from a bot deliberately. Okay. Now, the employee is going to look at it and go, oh, yeah, I better step up my game. I was having an off week last week. I'm going to go and talk to one of my colleagues and take some work off their plate and really get this, step this up, and their performance improves. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it is genuinely a lazy employee, and we are going to have manager intervention happen. But the important part is that we all have had alarm clocks in our lives. We may not have liked hearing our alarm clock, but none of us woke up in the morning thinking that the alarm clock had a personal grudge against us. It is better for morale if you're going to have to do metrics-based performance assessment to let a bot do it. Because I would much rather that my interaction my employees have with their managers is generally a lift, not a push down. Right? So if somebody's not performing and my bot can tell them that and they improve on their own, then I've avoided one interaction that would have been challenging and time consuming for the manager and maybe perceived as negative by the employee. On the other hand, there will be times when there is no other way around it and you got to have a manager intervene. But man, wouldn't it be better if the manager said, hey, I've been getting notices for the past couple of weeks that your utilization's been down a little bit. I had some ideas for how I could help you. Do you have a minute? Right? It's a better interaction all the way around. So, the more we can do with automation and with analytics, the better off we are. So my argument to you is you don't just need Power BI, you need Power Automate, you need tools like Microsoft Teams. And again, it doesn't, this is not really intended to be a Microsoft bigot conversation. Yes, I love the platform. I'm a 365 guy, but I can do this same thing with Zapier and with Slack. Whatever your tools of choice are, the principles and the philosophy are the same. So we've got 5 minutes left to spare. If you've got some questions or comments or you want to talk at all, feel free to unmute and ask me. I've got some things on the screen here that are upcoming webinars. If you are a Teams shop, we run every month a Teams training for end users that's geared around that you can have all your employees attend completely for free. And literally, it's just to up the skill set. It's a technical training to help the average end user up their skill set with Teams. This one for managers in C-suite is where I get into really advanced features of Microsoft Teams that a lot of people don't know are there that you may be able to use to replace other products in your business. We do have a technical Power BI training coming up on how to apply data analytics where the data source is not readily available. I'm going to be going through a case study where one of our customers had one of those applications that can only download data from a CSV. And so we built a Microsoft Azure durable function to go in and harvest that data programmatically and use Power Automate to trigger and then to import and create dynamic refreshes in a Power BI data set. So we'll be going through the architecture of that. And then keep an eye out, because we're working with Tech Collective to try and put together that 4-day technical training session that's, literally a Microsoft curriculum on Power BI enablement. So with that, thank you guys very much for your time, and I'll hang here for a few minutes if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Todd. Again, valuable presentation and lots of things to think about, I'm sure. I'll ask, I did post your next event, the June 17th event. I did post that just now in the post for those who aren't on the call at the very beginning, as well as that 1 question survey. If people can just take a moment to fill it out, it helps us build better programs for you and lets us know, did we hit the mark, or is there something more that you want to be hearing? So we thank you all for coming. I'll be quiet just in case anyone wants to ask Todd anything. And we wish you a wonderful afternoon and hope to see you back at another Tech Collective event or training.
People are waving at me. That's nice.
That's good. And yeah, lots of thanks coming through on the chat, Todd.
Yeah,
so
it's all right. It's pretty good.
That's
I'll take it.
Good things. Now your work is done for the day. You've educated 16 people. Now it's just rest and sit by a sunny shore somewhere.
Hey, Kino, you're on here. How are you, man?
Hey, Todd, how you doing?
If I were any better, vitamins would take me.
Yeah. No, great presentation. Thank you. My curiosity with learning and seeing what you had to say about Power BI was as it pertains to a product that we're launching that allows through a single source.
I know exactly what you're talking about. As soon as I saw your name, I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah. So I'm looking for potential problems, with and potential use cases. So thank you so much.
No problem. And honestly, man, that is we're down to pretty much just Kino and Envision folks for the most part here. So that everyone knows what we're talking about here, Kyle, Kino is with Mullings Group. He is Mullings Group, and Kino, they built an application that is like a data aggregator. So similar to like the Power BI data gateway, except that it's doing the extract and load side, basically. So, his app, you can take it and point it at several different data sets. It'll ingest the data and feed it out through a single stream. And it looks to the Power BI side, if I understand it properly, you correct me if I'm wrong, to the Power BI side, it basically looks like a data warehouse, even though it's polling the data essentially in real time. Yes,
right.
Kino?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That sounds correct. And basically it's meant to be just a pipe, right? And the additional layer that we added onto it, because that's giving you raw data. The other side we're adding is to give you transactional data. So